There is truly no easier way of describing the story of Telltale than simply leading with the words bad business. The story of Telltale is one of the saddest deaths in the gaming industry. What was once a promising developer and publisher in the industry fell to nothing more than an afterthought in just a couple years. So without dragging this intro on too long, this is the Gaming Graveyard New and Improved, and this is the story of Telltale Games. Telltale Games was founded by Kevin Bruner, Dan Connors, and Troy Molander, a group of former LucasArts employees. They worked for LucasArts on many of their adventure games. However, in March of 2004, LucasArts would announce that they felt the current marketplace realities and underlying economic considerations deemed that adventure games just weren't worth it for them in the long run anymore, so they would stop working on these types of games. This unfortunate decision to move on from adventure games would see sequels like Throttle 2 and Sam & Max Freelance Police be completely killed off. With that announcement, they would essentially lay off the entire developer behind these games and other adventure-like games. Although the founders of Telltale Games were not laid off during this time period, they felt that the moving away from adventure games spelled doom for LucasArts. They also just did not agree with the idea of moving on from the genre as a whole. So with this decision being set in stone by LucasArts to move away from adventure games and the disagreement that the founders of Telltale had, they decided to leave in July of 2004 to found Telltale Games. The whole purpose of founding Telltale Games was to push adventure games, was to make adventure games, and to prove that adventure games were still a viable game to make in this industry. So they founded Telltale and they got to work on their first idea for a game. Their first idea was to develop a new Sam & Max game in their episodic format that they were hoping to make very popular. However, the more and more they looked into it and the more and more they realized that Sam & Max licensing-wise was going to be very unrealistic to get. And the reason for that is because the company they had just left had the license. And to say that LucasArts was pretty bitter would be an under-fucking statement. LucasArts, despite having zero plans for the license, refused to negotiate with Telltale. With Telltale basically being cock-blocked by LucasArts from being able to obtain the license to Sam & Max, they decided to just simply wait out LucasArts' rights to the license. LucasArts had the rights till around mid-2005, so Telltale had around a year to wait before they could get their hands on it. Now, it's important to know why Telltale were so dedicated to make a Sam & Max game. They felt that, well, the small and dedicated audience for Sam & Max would be relatively easy to appeal to without having to put too much money behind the actual development itself. Even if it wasn't the smartest plan to wait out the license, that was their goal. So Telltale decided to work on a different game to hold them over for a little bit until the license became available. This game turned out to be Telltale Texas Hold'em. It was a poker game and it was rough. It wasn't anything special, it was your average poker game, but the whole premise was to kinda just test out the Telltale tools and their in-house engine. Which, to be fair, is a really smart idea and allows them to test their engine in a kind of creative way. They also decided to test out their episodic format while they waited for Sam & Max to open up. They did this by using the Bone comic book series from Jeff Smith. You will be forgiven for not knowing what the fuck that is. They dubbed the game Bone Out from Boneville, and it was never finished. They initially planned for 5 episodes, but only wound up doing 2. To also hold them off, they worked on the CSI games for Ubisoft. These games were also developed as episodes, but I mean, they did alright. It wasn't anything crazy, and even I remember playing these games, although I don't think anybody and their mom knew they were actually from Telltale. For anybody trying to keep track, yeah, that is roughly 3 games in 1 year. Oh, Telltale, you never really changed, did you? Ultimately, none of these games really did much to push Telltale as a brand. It was just kind of a groundwork to build them up into being the studio they want to be when Sam & Max opens up. They were simply just trying to give themselves a nice solid foundation for when they jumped into what they felt was going to be their first big release. And finally, after 1 year of being in business and not releasing anything that pretty much anybody remembers you for, they finally got the license to Sam & Max in 2005, and they immediately began development on their first Sam & Max game, which was dubbed Sam & Max Save the World Season 1. Episodes were to be released on a very tight monthly basis. The first episode would release on October 17th of 2006, which gives them about a year of core development. This first season would receive a massive 6-episode season and would be considered a massive success for Telltale. This would be also considered probably one of the only cases at that point of an episodic game series having a good showing. It wasn't on the level of like a GTA 5, don't get me wrong, but it was a solid showing for a brand new company, and especially as this is Telltale's first legitimate attempt at selling you their first core game. After a solid success with the first season, they had a round of investment and pushed forward with the second season of the game. It would be dubbed Sam & Max Beyond Time and Space and was again a pretty solid success for the studio. Now, the success of Telltale from 2005 to around 2008 was unheard of for an episodic company. This does not mean that this was a top-tier studio by any means. It was just the first signs of an episodic company actually being able to make it in the industry. Now, Sam & Max Beyond Time and Space was released in 2007 and got its last episode around 2008. At this point, Telltale was the average studio. They release a game, take a 2-year break, release another game, and then they move on. I want you to keep that in mind for the future of this video. Just keep that in the back of your mind. Telltale in 2005 to 2008 released 2 games. Alright, I trust you. I believe you're going to remember that. Let's move on. So, in 2005, the biggest RKO out of fucking nowhere happened, and Darnell Rodriguez would become the CEO of LucasArts. Why is this relevant to the story of Telltale? Well, because he wanted to see the old LucasArts adventure properties start to be used again. So they licensed Monkey Island to Telltale Games. LucasArts basically just said, you know what, we're done with adventure games, laid off a ton of staffers, lost key parts of their staff to newly found Telltale, and then once Telltale found a little bit of success with adventure games, they came back for sloppy seconds. Corporations are truly some shameless people. Anyway, getting this license was a huge get for Telltale as they would begin working on Tales of Monkey Island. This is a very important moment in Telltale's history as it was the first time the company would release their games on console. Tales of Monkey Island would release in July of 2009 and get its final episode in a 5-part episodic series in December of 2009. This game would do relatively well again. It was kind of on pace for the rest of their releases, and they weren't really going above and beyond at this point, but they were still having relative success as an indie studio. So in 2010, Telltale, with their newfound success, decided to begin working on a program that would see them make one-off games or less high-quality games, if you will, to help them grow their ability to explore other gameplay and storytelling features without having to implement them in their current episodic series. The first game that would fit this niche would be Nelson Tether's Puzzle Agent. It was a puzzle-solving game. Again, it was a small project, nothing really to know about this except for it released in June of 2010. They would also work on Poker Night at the Inventory. It was a poker game featuring characters from the IPs they had already worked on, and then the most random collab of all time, Valve's Team Fortress 2 was also in the game. This would release in late 2010. None of these sold obviously really well, and they were just small projects to help the studio grow their gameplay capabilities and other weird things they wanted to try out. Also in June of 2010, Telltale announced that they had secured the license to develop 2 episodic series based on Back to the Future and Jurassic Park. This was a big fucking deal for Telltale, and it goes without needing to be said that this was easily the largest IPs they had worked on, and this was also the biggest audience the company has been able to reach since their founding. There was one other very important change that these games made that would change Telltale forever. Telltale's Jurassic Park would be the first time the company moved away from their traditional adventure game format and implemented new features like quick time events and time-limited choices that the company would become known for. Back to the Future would be the first of these games to release in December 22nd of 2010 and would get its fifth and final episode in June 23rd of 2011. Jurassic Park the game would then follow it up. November 15th of 2011, it would get 4 episodes, and to say that these games did well would be an understatement, as in 2010, when Back to the Future released, Telltale's revenue was at $10 million for the year, a 90% increase from the previous year. 2011 would see that growth continue with Jurassic Park the game. Moving forward to 2011, in April, Telltale would announce that they had also acquired the rights to make Law & Order games. This would lead to the release of Law & Order Legacies, which was an interesting episodic series for Telltale. It didn't do particularly well from my research, but there is not solid numbers on it, so it could have done really well. All we know is that it released in December of 2011 and got its final episode in 2012. Now, it is safe to say that Telltale at least broke even on every single game they've released to this point. Now, the reason I say that this is a safe guess is because Telltale expanded from 90 employees to 140 employees in 2011. And this is precisely when, to cap off the 2011 year for Telltale, they would announce the most important license that they would ever get, The Walking Dead. For their Walking Dead game, Telltale had an ace up their sleeve. And by ace up their sleeve, I mean they decided to completely abandon what they founded their company to do. They decided to officially move completely away from the traditional adventure games that they had been releasing to this point, and they instead decided to focus on providing a more cinematic experience by giving players choice and all that good stuff that Telltale is known for. Moving forward to 2012, they would officially release Season 1 of The Walking Dead. It would be released on April 24th, 2012, shout out my birthday, and would get its final episode November 20th of 2012. The game would be published by Skybound Games, and what was expected to be a $20 to $30 million overall revenue would be more like $40 million upfront in revenue for the studio. Overnight, Telltale Games went from a relatively obscure studio that was releasing some solid adventure games to the #1 story-based studio in the entire industry. It was quite the change, if you ask me. By 2013, the Telltale release of The Walking Dead had surpassed 8.5 million episode purchases. After the overwhelming success, Telltale immediately greenlit a 5-episode long Season 2. Around this time in 2013, they also had begun working on the Tales from the Borderlands IP from Gearbox. Oh yeah, and they were also working on The Wolf Among Us. The Wolf Among Us ultimately actually didn't perform all that well. It released in October 11th of 2013, the first game after the Walking Dead first season, and it underperformed. Then they released the second season of The Walking Dead, and that released on December 17th of 2013, and that did really fucking well, but actually did worse than the first season. They then worked on a Game of Thrones game in December 2nd of 2014 that would release, and it also underperformed. Heading into 2015, they would work on Minecraft Story Mode, and that would release October 13th of 2015, and actually did pretty well, but shocker, it underperformed from expectations. And this was a big deal for Telltale. Why? I mean, they only have 100 people. Well, no, actually, that is not true anymore. In 2013 and up to around 2015, well, they grew their studio from 160 people to 200, then from 200 to 250. The studio was expanding rapidly around this point, and they needed every game to continue to succeed if they were going to sustain this monumental growth they were building themselves to. Okay, but I can hear pretty much everybody getting confused about what is even happening, so let's take a step back for a moment and really understand why Telltale shifted their entire business model in 2 years. One very important change happened to Telltale around this time. Around 2014, Telltale reorganized and restructured their studio to handle the amount of work they were planning on taking on. This led to Dan Connors, one of the initial founders and the CEO of the studio since its founding, to resign. He was replaced by another founder, Kevin Bruner. Under Bruner's leadership, Telltale was working on all of these titles simultaneously. They could work on up to 4 core titles, not including side projects, all at the same time. This was the approach that he wanted. This was the approach he felt that was good for the studio. This is why when we see Telltale release The Walking Dead, immediately afterwards, you see them release The Wolf Among Us, The Walking Dead, Tales from the Borderlands, Game of Thrones, Minecraft Story Mode, and work on the 3rd season of The Walking Dead, as well as the Batman series, all within the 2014 to 2016 time period. This new model clearly led to a lot of crunch, and by a lot of crunch, I mean non-stop crunch. Employees were being worked non-stop. The Telltale sweatshop was in full effect. Although the company was technically bringing in more money because they were simply releasing more products, this mentality basically killed all creativity and polish the studio brought to their games. Hence why 50 seconds ago, I just brought up the fact that their games were underperforming. But there you go, you're caught completely up to date with everything that was going on internally at Telltale. So let's jump back onto the core timeline. So just so nobody gets confused, we're jumping back into the 2016 to 2017 time period. After the underperforming of all of their new games, with the underperforming of The Wolf Among Us, The Walking Dead Season 2, Tales from the Borderlands, Game of Thrones, Minecraft Story Mode, The Walking Dead spin-off, Batman the Telltale series, The Walking Dead 3rd season, Guardians of the Galaxy, Minecraft Story Mode Season 2, and the 2nd season of the Batman series, Telltale was in a bit of a predicament. And by in a bit of a predicament, I mean their new CEO took power in 2014, and in just, let's see here, 3 years managed to completely get rid of all of the money the company had made to this point. They were now very much so in the red and were very much so bleeding cash with every single release they made. Okay, so moving forward, Telltale was like, you know what? I don't think this guy's doing a very good job. So Bruner was voted out in 2017 and replaced by Pete Howley, the former VP for games at fucking Zynga. As soon as he took power in November of 2017, he immediately began restructuring the company and cut 90 positions. That was a quarter of the company's staff. The hope was that they would deliver fewer games but have a better product that would make more money in the long run. They were also hoping to go back to the company's initial policy of releasing and then continuing to innovate on their successes instead of being a fucking sweatshop because Bruner was a fucking idiot. Bruner then was like, you know what, man? Fuck Telltale, and filed a lawsuit against them in 2017 after being voted out. And I'm gonna be completely honest with you, he was going after financial damages, and don't ask me how or what he wanted because I looked into it and still did not understand what he wanted. Telltale, for their part, brushed this aside and said it was baloney. 2017, we'll say, was a rough year, I think is a good way to put it. It wasn't a good year for Telltale. Long story short. So yeah, all of that happening in 2017, Telltale was probably glad that the New Year's finally came. And going into 2018, Howley had some good news for the company. He announced a partnership with Netflix, which was hopefully going to bring their games to subscribers, with the first being the Minecraft Story Mode. Also in 2018, they would work on and release the first few episodes of The Walking Dead: The Final Season. Those first few episodes were well received. I believe it was the first 2 that Telltale worked on, and people liked them. There was only one simple problem with Telltale continuing to work on The Walking Dead, and that simple and pretty small problem was just going out of business. Pete Howley would announce on September 21st of 2018 that Telltale had let go 225 to 250 employees and only held on to an additional 25 employees to fulfill their Minecraft Story Mode obligations. Outside of that, the studio was dead. They had hoped that an investor would save the company, but when it pulled out, the studio was no more. Telltale was obviously asked about The Walking Dead, but they simply just dropped it dead. I mean, I've never seen a company just straight up abandon a game quite like Telltale abandoned that. The publisher Skybound Games, who had, let me just double check that this is correct. Oh yeah, 3 employees at the time stepped in to save the project. And yeah, Skybound finished The Walking Dead, and Telltale finished the Minecraft Story Mode for Netflix, and that was it. That was the official end of Telltale. And I can hear everyone saying that this feels abrupt and feels unsatisfying, but that was kind of just Telltale for you. They were an unsatisfying company to research, I can assure you of that. One day, Telltale was functioning and everyone thought that they were going to be able to sustain themselves, and the next they just died. Absolute no context, no warning, they just shut down. Although technically Telltale is still alive as they were relaunched under LCG Entertainment, it is far from what Telltale used to be. Who knows what this new Telltale has in the tank? Their newest product, The Expanse, a Telltale series, was a really interesting game. I'm probably going to cover it at some point in my lifetime because I truly don't understand what the fuck happened there. The next Telltale game was announced to be The Wolf Among Us 2 in 2024. Although, seeing how we are now in October 18th or October 20th by the time you're seeing this video, and we still don't have a release date for The Wolf Among Us 2, I think it is safe to say that the game is either canceled or the company is severely struggling and doesn't know if they're going to get the game out. They're incredibly tight-lipped about when it is coming, so I will keep you posted whenever I get some news on that. And I want to finish this by saying, I know this isn't the most satisfying gaming graveyard video I've made, and I know it certainly is one of the more confusing ones I've made, but I think it is going to be one of my most high quality videos, and I truly do think that this is going to be my best video today. Ultimately, Telltale is my favorite company pretty much of all time. They release some of my favorite games of all time, and they will always have a place in my heart, especially Clementine, one of my favorite characters of all time. If I ever blow up on YouTube, or if that ever happens, I just want to put this out there. One of the first things I will ever do if I make a good amount of money is buy the trademark and buy the company of Telltale Games. Even if I can't do anything with it and it doesn't succeed, I just want to know that I put something into it. Owning the trademark alone would be a happy ending in my lifetime. This is the Gaming Graveyard, and I'll see you next time.